guys, Turbo Violin here.
And Schokazulu.
And we are playing a little Minecraft while Schokazulu reads creepypastas.
Today we're going to be reading Clockwork, Your Time Is Up. This is personally my favorite one. It's really well written, but really super gory. So, yeah. Okay. A little girl sat in her room. Her messy brown hair were put into pigtails as her hazel eyes stared at the door. She hugged her stuffed giraffe close to her little body and listened closely to the loud yells of her father and mother. Never should have had any damn kids, screamed a loud, deep voice. All they do is make messes, complain, and draw on walls. Draw on walls. He's cut off by a high, angered yell of the girl's mother. They're children, David. They don't know any better. Oh, fuck me, Mary Beth. I don't want to hear your bullshit excuses. I've had just enough with them. And what will you plan to do about it? A girl heard loud footsteps coming towards her room. She hugged her giraffe closer. The door was violently opened. In the doorway stood her large, angry, overweight father. In one of his meaty hands, he held a large textbook. David, stop it! Screamed her mother, but the father ignored his wife's pleading cries. He grabbed the little girl by the collar, and she screamed and kicked, trembling and shaking in fear. The girl's father harshly held up the textbook. This is for drawing on my fucking walls, you little bitch! Years later, the girl, known as Natalie, was now 9 years old. Going through a stage of puberty, she was naturally a little chubby. Okay. Like the usual, she sat in her room watching TV. Her dad was ranting on about some economic crap that she really didn't give a shit about. She could give less a shit about, as she munched on some popcorn. She was also currently drawing a picture. There were a bit of gore in it, but strangely, she really liked drawing blood. It gave her some weird satisfaction. And other than that, multitasking was no problem for her. It became apparent at her young age, after having to do so much hard work and labor, that she was able to do so many things at once. Drawing ended up being her talent and passion. It was her way of escaping from reality whenever something bad would rear its ugly head and peer in, or when she was simply bored. She suddenly heard the closing door and looked to the left, pausing and munching on her popcorn. There stood her brother Lucas, who was 14 years old. What is it? She could still hear her father's yelling from outside the door. Dad scaring you? He let out a chuckle. No way. I think we're both used to his yelling by now. There was a long pause. So, why are you in here? He seemed to play with his sleeves slightly and twitch a bit. I have to ask you something. He trained his eyes on her. She frowned slightly, growing impatient with her brother interrupting her movie and drawing. What? He moved a little closer. You said you wanted to be cool and grow up like a teenager, right? She nodded, slightly brightened up suddenly. Well, I have an offer. Just spit it out, you dimwit. You know what? What guys and girls do together sometimes? Oh my god. Her older brother raped her.
Is that a part of the story, or?
That was a part of the story.
Yeah. I mean, does it actually say, oh my god, her brother raped her?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Stay away from my corporate rule! God.
The next day at school, Natalie did not say a word. She did not speak for the whole day. She didn't have anyone to speak to anyways. Nobody could know. Nobody should know. And so nobody would know. Her teacher picked up on a few of her puzzled expressions, but she dismissed it as if she just did not understand the lesson. Natalie also felt as she was in severe pain. She had no idea it could hurt Feeling scared, she walked home and silently went to her room. But later that day, she was once again greeted by her brother. Okay. Nobody would know. At school, she finally decided to tell someone. Even though they weren't her friends, she just felt she had to. She walked up to the group of girls and she would occasionally see in the hallway. They looked like nice girls, and Natalie had occasionally talked before. Hey, Mia, the ginger girl looked over at Natalie, having a straight face. Yeah, I really need to talk to you about something. It's been going on for a while, and you and your friends, well, I feel like you're the only people I can trust. Mia and her friends seemed to pull little smirks, but only for a moment. Little did Natalie know, they were hungry for gossip. Alright, Alright, you can trust us. What's up? One day later was all it took. She had been getting constant remarks on social networking sites, such as, one sec, such as Facebook. One time someone even called her a whore, not to mention their lunch had ended up getting in her hair. It was going to be the least of her problems, but Natalie, being only 9, could not help but being gently upset at this fact. However, she did not cut, she did not peep, she never said a word about it. As you may recall, so far in this journey, she had kept everything inside. She supposed it would be better. She wouldn't let the pain get the best of her. 3 a.m. school night. Her mother was going to kill her. The girl known as Natalie was now 16. She was productive in high school, close to the honor roll. For once, she felt calm and happy, though, like the usual, she would occasionally become a hermit in her room, hiding away from her dad, who still liked to constantly yell and baby about the economy, money, and politics, and all of the bullshit that she was flat out tired of hearing. Her eyes started to feel heavy. Then she had an assignment to work on, but that was no longer important to her. All that was on her mind was sleep. She closed her laptop, and after her eyes adjusted to the darkness slightly, she told her old, worn-down stuffed giraffe in the corner. She stared at it in complete, utter silence. Memories passed through her mind, and she felt tears come to her eyes, but quickly she blinked them back. No more breaking, she thought to herself, but she continued to stare at it. What the fuck are you looking at? She said to the stuffed object. It simply stared back with soft, black, beady eyes. She shook her head and stood up. She looked down sadly at the little toy animal and gently picked it up with her arms. She cradled it and spoke softly to it. I'm sorry. Some tears ran down her face. She pet its rough, short fur softly. As she lied on her bed, she slowly went to sleep. She was woken up by the angry growls of her mother. She tiredly opened one of her eyes. I can't believe I forgot to take that laptop away. You were on it all night, weren't you? Natalie sighed and pressed her face deeper into the pillow, hugging her giraffe closer. Her mother sighed and walked out. She took a shower, brushed her teeth, and ate some breakfast. When she got dressed, she put on a gray and blue hoodie with fur on the inside, and the hood. It wasn't her favorite. But it was the only one she could wear to school, due to the others being in the wash. She also put on black jeans and some thin, fashionable boots. She then finally went down to the stairs to get driven to school. She hopped in the car and her mom sped off towards school. However, on the way there, due to lack of sleep, she slowly put her head against the window in the car and started to drift off. Her dreams, or nightmares, I should say, consisted of her physical abuse as a child. Secondly, the sexual abuse from her old brother, Lucas, that had lasted 4 years before she had the guts to turn him off. She started twitching and cringing in her sleep, but her mother took no notice, and her mother never took notice. Her mother never took notice. She was suddenly sharply awoken by a sound of her mother. We're here, having an annoyed tone, most likely from her sleeping. She looked at the large sign of the school that read Walkerville Collegiate Institute for the Creative Fine Arts. She sighed tiredly and stepped out, putting her backpack on her shoulder. See ya, she proclaimed, closing the door. She walked into the school and chatted with a couple of friends until she went up to the locker in the floor. She grabbed her book and went 5 minutes, and before 5 minutes of time was over, she ran to class. Ah. She was suddenly sharply woken by the... Oh, wait. Her English teacher annoyingly put her hand on Natalie's desk. "Where's your assignment, Miss Quatel?" Natalie swallowed. "Oh, I forgot it at home. Sorry, Miss Homenick." She growled and stood. "Your time is up, Miss Quillette. Don't disappoint me." Natalie seemed puzzled and thought for a moment. She didn't know why, but those words seemed to melt through her. She simply ignored it and went back to listening to the lesson, falling asleep not too long after, of course. Later that day, she was heading back to her locker for fourth period when suddenly her boyfriend Chris came up to her. "Hey, can we talk after school? Is that all right?" She smiled, loving to talk to Chris, though strangely she didn't suspect anything. He was always such a sweet guy. During a French class, she dared. During a French class, she dared not to pay attention. Instead, she doodled the things she loved to draw: blood, gore, people being stabbed, knives, and macabre or something, things of the such. Other people would say it's pretty dark for her to draw such thing, but she saw nothing wrong with it. For some reason, it actually felt like a normal thing to her. Miss Colette, she quickly covered a doodle on her paper and looked up at her French teacher quickly, trying to hide her fear. Yes, Miss Lavoisier?" Gestured her to move her arm, and with a slight turn of his head. "Show me your work." She hesitantly moved her arm to show a picture of someone being stabbed by an insane man. The teacher stared puzzled, looking at her a bit. She smiled nervously. "Erase that and get started on your work," he said in a strangely calm voice. He walked away, and she sighed and began to erase the picture. "And Miss Colette?" She looked up at him slightly. "Your time is almost up on getting your work done. I suggest doing it now." She growled at the remark. Time always seemed to be against her. As far as she could care, time could go fuck itself. After class, she walked out of the school to find her boyfriend standing near the fence of the sidewalk. She smiled and walked over, hoping her day could at least get cheered up by him. But as she walked over, her smile slowly faded. He wasn't smiling back. "Chris, what's wrong? What did you want to talk about?" He sighed. "Natalie, I think it's time we should start seeing other people." She felt her heart break. But why?" He gave her a bit of a stern look. "It's your mindset, your drawings. They creep me out. I think there's really something wrong with you, and the saddest part is why you haven't told me why you're acting like this. It makes me feel irresponsible. So I just can't do it anymore. I'm sorry." And with that, he began to walk away. Natalie slammed her hands on the bathroom counter at home. She stared at herself in the mirror, her eyes twitching. I won't hurt myself like the others. I can stay strong." There was a needle and a black thread in her hand. Pointless, doesn't help. Some weird sensation pulled at her subconscious. She chuckled slightly. "No. I'm doing it because I want to." She held up the needle with thread on the end of it, and she smirked widely. "Time is up." Pierce after pierce, cut after cut. Even though excruciating pain was going through her, she did not whine, she did not whimper, she did not cry. There was no tears to shed. All she did was smile. Blood leaked from her pierces, and made a low dripping noise into the sink and onto the counter. When she was finished, she stood back and admired her handiwork. She stroked the horrendous stitches on the sides of her mouth that spread into a wide smile. She felt the warm, wet blood on her fingers and licked it gently, consuming the metallic-tasting liquid in pure ecstasy. She stopped when she saw her mother's reflection in the mirror behind her and sharply turned around. She saw her mother's wide eyes and pale face. As she looked at her fingers, seeing the blood, she suddenly felt the pain and then started to cry. "Mom!" She had never felt so confused. What had just happened to her? Her mother had scheduled some therapy for her. Natalie had not gotten rid of the stitches in fear of how much pain it would bring. So she went to the therapist with them. She made sure her hood was up, as not to let anybody see. She sat and looked down the comfortable leather seat and stared at the blonde woman across from her in silence. "So your name's Natalie, isn't it?" Natalie just nodded. "I'm Deborah, and I'm here to help. Now tell me, what have been some of your problems lately?" Time. Time has been my problem. Deborah gave her a confused look. "What about time, dear?" Natalie's hand roughly gripped leather on the seat. "Everything. It makes you live through it, slowly progressing through life, being controlled by society, only to be tortured for seemingly to no end until you find you no longer have a purpose. It's a vicious cycle. Time does not end. It does not slow down. It does not speed up. It is violent. It makes you live through the torture over and over again, unable to fast forward away from it." Natalie really had no idea what she had just said. It felt like she wasn't herself anymore. Could this be because of all the things that had kept contained? No, it wasn't possible. For some strange reason, she liked it. The therapist leaned closer. "Sweetheart, I want you to tell me what's happened to you." Natalie still stared, where there was a long pause. She smirked slightly, the pierces on her stitches slightly opening again. "Why don't you tell me, Blondie? You're the expert." Deborah seemed to have a bit of an annoyed look. "I can't help you unless you tell me it's wrong, Natalie." Her fingers started to tear into the leather seat. "Natalie isn't here anymore." "What's that?" Deborah's eyes widened. She got up. "I'll be right back. Please stay here." She walked out, leaving Natalie alone. Maybe if she had done something at this point, she wouldn't have come to what she is today. Maybe more people would be alive, and maybe she would be sane again. As someone I would love to admit, as much as I would love to admit that she got up from that chair and stopped this all from happening. But I'm obligated to give you the horrid truth. Natalie did not move. She sat perfectly still, perfectly silent, and perfectly calm in that chair. And after a while, waiting and impatient, her parent, but she, impatience, her parents finally walked in. She stood happily to go, but she noticed her parents' expressions, and even her father had a strange, silent look on his face. Her confusion grew, but she said no words and followed them back to the car. On the way there, she thought she was going home. She started to drift off. Strangely, she heard a dark voice in her dream. It almost sounded like herself, echoing into the diurnal blackness. "Your time is up." She shot awake, some beads of sweat rolling down her face. She wasn't home. She wasn't in the car. She was in a bed, a white bed, in a white room. She looked at her side, seeing that she looked up to a heart monitor. She went to get up, but suddenly realized she was bonded down. She panicked, then started to struggle, but paused, hearing the door to her left open. A man in a white shirt looked at her, his hands behind his back, and almost looked like one of those cliché doctors you would find in some scientific lab. She paid full attention as Mr. Scientist started to speak. "You must be very confused right now, I can imagine. But I'm letting you know we're here to help. We're only here to help. Your parents agreed to sign a contract to give you mental drugs to hopefully help your state of mind." She opened her mouth to protest, but it was quickly silenced. "You don't need to worry. You'll be back to normal in no time. Just try to relax." He walked over and she tried to skittishly move away. She couldn't, but couldn't due to the bonds of leather straps around her wrists and legs. He carefully took a mask and put it over her mouth and nose. She stubbornly tried to get it off, but felt herself starting to slip under the drugs, and her eyes slowly shut. And then suddenly she woke up. She couldn't comprehend what the hell she was seeing. She was being given multiple injections. Even some things were rubbed on her skin. She felt woozy, but was completely aware of her surroundings. She was entering a rare state in which some patients go through while undergoing surgery. They are able to see what they are being worked on, but they can feel the pain. Their brain is active, but they cannot respond. However, she was able to. her heart rate in the monitor. She started to speed up, and the doctors took notice of this. They looked at her, seeing her opened eyes. One of the doctors was yelling at another. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but she suddenly felt a rush of adrenaline. She slowly started to slip through her bonds, shaking violently. One of the doctors was going to hold her down, but was suddenly hesitant of doing so, and all three doctors backed away. She sat on the edge of the bed now and ripped off the mask and tube from her arm. She got up and started to stumble towards them. Her breath hitched and her vision was blurry. She could make out herself giving a couple insane chuckles, but suddenly she felt a searing pain in her chest. She gripped where her heart was supposed to be and dropped to her knees. Then she coughed up blood and fell to the floor, completely blacking out. She woke up and slowly, groggily after that, she was back in the bed and the doctor was sitting beside the bed. Something went wrong, horribly wrong. She didn't know why, but she felt a tremendous amount of hatred towards the doctor. He took notice of that and looked away. You weren't supposed to wake up while you were giving you the doses for your mental state. We aren't sure how it affected you, but we have a feeling we're going to find out. He paused for a second, before taking a small mirror and not looking at her. It happened to have an effect on your appearance as well. She looked at herself in the mirror and her eyes widening. Her eyes, they were completely green. She noticed she still had stitches in her mouth as well, but for some reason she couldn't help but feel happy. Her heart rate started to increase again. The doctor looked in shock, seeing that she was already standing over him. "Doctor," she said, still chuckling. He trembled in sight, pressing a button from under the... Yes? Your time is up." A loud scream was heard through the halls of the apparent hospital. Two security guards rushed into the room, kicking open the door. Blood was the first thing they saw. Blood on the walls, blood on the bed, on the floor, hell, even the ceiling. Natalie had taken the doctor and strapped him down on the bed. His spine was completely snapped as the bed was bent almost into a sandwich. Likely from the adjustments made, someone could make to it. Blood poured from his eyes, mouth, nose, and about every opening of his body. And there in the corner was the murderer, happily drawing her gruesome pictures on the wall in blood, followed by the phrase, "Your time is up." And she slowly turned to look at them. A wide, crazy grin spread across her face. "Hello, friends. Would you like to play?" The guards quickly pulled out their guns, and suddenly she charged at one of them. Being able to dodge his bullets, she grabbed a large knife from the sheath onto his pocket and slashed it right across his waistline. Blood from the organs flooded out, and he collapsed to the ground. She inhaled deeply, loving the damp stench of breath of death. The other shook with fear and dropped his gun. She slowly walked up to him and pasted the tip of his knife to his chest. "Your time is up?" She slowly slid the knife down his chest, all the way to the end of his gut. His organs spilled out onto the floor as well and collapsed, dead. Natalie's mother silently sleeping in her room next to her husband. She woke to the sound of a knocking on her door. She groggily got up and walked out of the bathroom. To the front door, it was completely pouring outside, and thunder boomed in the distance. She walked up to the door and paused when she was about to grab the doorknob. There was a faint sound of insane laughter. The rain and thunder seemed to become quiet all of a sudden. She pressed her ear against the door and listened closely. "Hello, Mother." Natalie burst through the door, wielding two knives in her hand. Her mother stumbled back, hitting her head against the coat rack. One of the hooks broke into her skull, and she bled violently from the back end of the head onto the floor. She fell to the ground paralyzed, but still conscious. Natalie towered over her, but slowly knelt down to meet the level of her eyes, and showed her two knives covered in thick red blood. "I was suffering, Mother." She ran the tip of the knife across her cheek, cutting it slightly. Natalie tilted her head. "But you did nothing." All her mother could do was shake and gasp constantly like a fish on land. Natalie grabbed her mother and gently set her down on the back, so her back was lying flat on the ground. She proceeded to sit on top of her and started to make a V cut on her chest. Her mother only gasped and shook, but her breath started to seem choked and gurgle. Natalie knew she didn't have much time left. She proceeded to forcibly open her chest cavity with a loud crack and reached to grab her mother's heart as it slowly beat in her hand. Its pulses were growing dimmer and dimmer, and suddenly she ripped it out, blood spraying all over her face. She stared at her mother directly in the face as she slowly died. Sweet dreams! Your time was up. She put her heart into her mother's mouth. She put the heart into her mother's mouth, patting her cheek softly and stood up. She wasn't done yet. Next, Natalie's father. He had stirred awake and realized his wife had not returned yet. His eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and he suddenly realized Natalie, standing at his bedside, smirking crazily with her green eyes glowing in the darkness. Blood was all over her, and the scent was unbearable. She put on a fake, sad face. Oh dear, Mother's gone. I wonder who'll get the money. She suddenly grabbed her father's forehead. That's all you ever cared about anyway. Her father, however, was a fighter, and he sprung up and grabbed her by the neck and threw her to the ground. He started to stomp on her chest until she coughed blood and he stared down at her. Doesn't it feel good, Daddy? She coughed up more blood. After that, all you could hear seemed to mind doing it all those years, didn't you? After all, you never seemed to mind doing these things all those years ago, didn't you? He narrowed his eyes. You aren't my daughter. A wider smirk spread across her face, and she looked at him in glowing eyes as blood dripped down her mouth. You're right, I'm not. She suddenly tripped him, causing him to fall hard on the floor. She got up, knives in hand. They say the bigger you are, the harder they fall. While he was winded, she grabbed the pillow and stuffed it in his face and started to stomp on his face harder and harder, hearing loud cracking noises after a while. And then she pulled the pillow away. His face was gruesomely mutilated, and he was making muffled noises and crying in pain. What's the matter, Daddy? Pain too much for you? She stuffed both knives into his stomach, leaving them there for now as she ripped off one of the large, heavy wooden poles from the bed. She set it down on his legs, took out the knives. Gonna need these. She chuckled and sat on the pole and laid on his legs. Suddenly, she started to walk back while sitting down. The weight from her body on the pole slowly started to squeeze his innards up through his body. He started to gag and blood poured from his mouth. His breath was silenced, and she hit a bit of a snag. Come on! She snarled as she forced herself to walk back with more weight. Suddenly, his organs burst out of his mouth, and nasty gore piled on the floor. On all sides of his face, she nodded at his carcass. And walked out. Your time was up, Daddy. Finally, this would be her favorite part. She quickly snuck down to her brother's room, silently opening the door. Blood dripped from her knife, making a low tapping sound as the droplets hit the hard wood. Her brother wasn't in bed. It was apparent that she must be hiding somewhere. She grinned. Oh, dear brother, come on now. She started to walk inside. All I want to do is have a little fun. As she stepped in more, she listened closely for any sounds, any breathing, any moving, and then sniffed the air for his putrid scent. And the closer she listened, the finally noticed something, faint breathing noise. Whack! She fell to the ground, trembling. Her brother was behind her, and now bloodied baseball bat. He was glaring down with anger, panting in rage. She tried to slowly get up, but he hit her again and again and again. Mother always did like you best, you bitch. He hit her hard this time, before taking a breather. She was bleeding heavily, her green eyes drooped and glowing faintly in the darkness. She felt weak and looked closer up at the ceiling. She recalled the days when she spent in there being tortured, having to go through it for 4 years, looking at the same damn ceiling. It sent a sudden rush of energy into her body, and then started to stand, laughing insanely. And then her brother hit her again, but her brother went to hit her again, but she used both knives to block it. "You're going to hell, brother." With a large push, he sent her brother flying onto the bed. He hit his head against the wall and growled angrily, about to lunge at her, and then she stabbed the 2 knives into his arm, keeping them pinned on the wall. He screamed and struggled rapidly. "Let's see what we can use here." She started walking around the room and smirked, seeing a simple butter knife on his bedside. She picked it up and walked over to him. "They say that the eyes are softest organs on the body." She slowly licked the knife. "Soft as butter." He looked in horror, trying to get away as she started to dig out his eyes with the knife. He shrieked loudly, and she quickly tied a cloth around his mouth. Now, we can't have you waking the neighbors." He wasn't able to see anything. His pain was unbearable. Blood leaked violently from his eye sockets. He would cry, but he was now incapable. She dug around for more items and picked up a pair of scissors. She walked over to him, crawling over him. "I think you need a cut loose, brother." She stabbed the scissors into his gut. He cried out a muffled scream of pain. She treated him like arts and crafts, cutting his skin like paper. She lifted up his large intestine and smirked wickedly. "You know what I love to do? Macaroni art." She started to cut the intestine into sections. These might be a little too big to put on a plate though. She could hear his brother foaming blood from his mouth. However, he had to swallow the blood back because of the cloth around his mouth. "Doesn't that taste good?" She licked his blood. She licked his blood off her fingers. "I sure know I like it." And she let out another muffled scream. She went down to his toes and started cracking them, ripping them off one by one. After a while, his screams grew futile. His throat was raw and bloody by now. Next, she worked on his fingers, snapping them and ripping them off slowly, and the gurgling became louder, and he started to squirm. He was choking on his own blood. He pulled the cloth down, and blood poured from his mouth, and turned his head to the side and vomited violently. There, brother," she said, patting his head. "Eat this and feel better." She stuffed one of his fingers in his mouth, making it jam into his throat. He choked and slowly died. "Your time was up." The girl known as Natalie, walking into her room, dripping blood off the corner. She saw it. Her stuffed giraffe. She knelt down and stared at it, and then, without a word, she stood back and walked to the bathroom, staring at herself, covered in blood. She could hear a faint ticking noise. She looked down and saw a pocket watch. She stared at its hands, slowly turning, listening to the ticking for what seemed like eternity. She took out one of her now red knives as it heavily dripped blood onto the counter. She grabbed the pocket watch and disassembled and watched the watch until the small clock was left. "Time makes you live through torture," she said, slowly bringing the knife up to her eye. "Slowly progressing through life, being controlled by fucking society." She started to slowly dig into her eye as the vision in her left eye grew blurry and red, until you find you no longer have a purpose. She felt her eye start to relent from the socket, blood pouring in the sink. It's a vicious cycle. She felt her eye dangle out of her socket, a sharp pain where it was connecting to her head. Time does not speed up. It does not slow down. It is violent. She grabbed into the corner of her eye and tore it right off, the eye falling in the sink. It makes you live through the torture over and over again. She started to place the clock in her eye, unable to fast forward away from it. Then there was a squishing sound and drips of blood until it seemed like the clock fit perfectly into her eye. and Clockwork. The young 16-year-old, used to be known as Natalie, walked away from a burning house. The flames engulfed everything, and inside the draft slowly burned, along with the carcasses of her family. Here's a little after the story. Some say she still lives on, carrying her insanity with her, leaving so many dead, saying she decided that when their time would come to an end, the only way to detect her presence is if you're cuddled, as if you're cuddled close in the covers at night, sleeping soundly, but in the darkness she watches, she determines. You hear ticking, and then you see a green flash of putrid clock eye. If she is there, you know your time is up. And that was Clockwork. That's a really interesting story. It was a little gory from when I had last read it, and it had pretty good writing, I guess. Some mistakes in there, but hey, you can't really judge the perfect creepypasta. So, Cody, what do you think?
I swear, every creepypasta has something to do with somebody going insane. Like Jeff the Killer, went insane. Clockwork, went insane. And they became killers.
Well, they do it. It's for a reason, Cody. It just makes them better. If they're totally sane, they know what they're doing. That's not true.
Really? Because the story sounds like they've gone insane and off the whack.
Oh, they have gone insane. But if a creepypasta is not a creepypasta without insaneness,
obviously,
a character going insane and killing people, or a video game, a hacked video game going insane and killing people.
Wow.
We'll see you guys in the next episode.
Yes, we will. And
Bye.
yeah.
So
See ya.